Hi everyone, this is the video over section 2.5, which is looking at order of operations. So instead of using parentheses to indicate the order of operations, so you may be familiar with the rule for order of operations as PEMDAS, we're going to look at it a little bit differently. So these rules, which are similar to the rules of grammar in English, dictate the order in which we perform operations to maintain clarity and consistency. Without them, it is unclear where to begin when simplifying an expression. So this will tell you really what order that you want to actually solve an expression. So, to simplify an expression, operations should be performed in the following order. We're first going to look at grouping symbols. And these can include parentheses, another form of parentheses, which is brackets, a fraction bar, a square root symbol, or absolute value. The next thing that you will look at are exponents, followed by multiplication or division. Now, something that I want to point out is when you do this, you're going to decide whether multiplication or division comes first by looking at left to right. So it's not that multiplication always comes before division. It's out of the two, which one comes first from left to right. And the same goes for addition and subtraction. You will again work from left to right with this. So we often think of it as PEMDAS in terms of how you guys most likely have been taught, but I'm going to write it a little bit differently. And instead of GEMDAS for grouping symbol, I'm even going to write it a little bit special. I'm going to have the M and the D at the same line, and same with the A and the S. And just remember that those go from left to right. So the rationale behind ordering comes from the hierarchy of operations and how they relate. If we think about it, multiplication is just repeated addition, and division is just repeated subtraction. We can even extend this. We can look at exponents as being repeated multiplication, and roots or square roots are just repeated division. If you use the memory aid PEMDAS or GEMDAS to remember the order of operations, be sure to understand that multiplication and division have the same priority level even though M is listed before D. Likewise, addition and subtraction have the same priority level even though A is listed before S. And that's why I have us write it this way. An expression like 3 times 4 is not what we mean by parentheses. When we look at these parentheses here, those imply multiplication. So this would still be considered multiplication, not the use of parentheses. If we actually have parentheses like this that group subtraction together, then we will consider parentheses as a grouping symbol. Okay, so we can actually consider grouping as many possibilities, and we did go over that quickly. We looked at it as being with parentheses. We looked at it with brackets, a square root, absolute value, and we also looked at a fraction bar, all being forms of grouping. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and simplify using order of operations. We have 18 minus 8 times 4 squared all over 3. So the first thing that we want to do is think of GEMDAS, and we want to see if we have any grouping. When we see the fraction bar, that should tell us that we want to use grouping. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the top and bottom because of my fraction bar. And I'm doing that because of grouping. Okay, so I'm just going to worry about the top for now. So I'm just going to focus on 18 minus 8 times 4 squared. The next thing I'm going to do is look to see if there's any other grouping. Since I don't see any other grouping, I'm now going to look at the next letter we have, which is exponent. So I'm going to see if I have an exponent. I do. So I'm going to use the exponent next. So when we get to the exponent, I'm going to rewrite it as 4 squared as 16. Okay, so now I use the exponent. I'm going to see if I have any other exponents. Nope. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next thing, which is multiplication or division. There isn't any division, but there is multiplication, so that's going to be the next thing that I use. So now I have 8 times 16 that I'm going to do. So that's going to be 128. It's still going to be subtracted from 18. Now the only thing that I have left here is subtraction. So that's going to be what I do next. So I'm just going to subtract. So 18 minus 128, I get negative 110. Okay. We don't want to forget that we separated everything. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put back together to divide. So I have negative 110 over 3. If it doesn't divide evenly, if you can't simplify it, you will leave it like the fraction that it is. So because negative 110 over 3 can't be simplified, this is going to be our answer. Okay, looking at number 1, it has 4 minus negative 3. The only operation that we have here is subtraction. These parentheses here are just here to emphasize the negative sign. So 4 minus negative 3 gives us just 7. For number 2, the only operations that we have here are subtraction and an absolute value. So absolute value comes first because that's our grouping symbol. So I'm going to first evaluate the absolute value. The absolute value of 3 is just 3 because it's 3 away from 0 on the number line. So I would just have 4 minus 3. I no longer need the absolute value symbols because I took the absolute value of it. Now I just have subtraction left, so 4 minus 3 gives me 1 for my answer. When I look at number 3, I have subtraction and I have an exponent. So the exponent is going to be applied before the subtraction. So negative 3 squared, remember it's a negative 3 times a negative 3, so that's going to give me positive 9. So I end up with 4 minus 9. Now the only thing left to do is subtract, so I get negative 5. Looking at the next one. In this one, we have brackets, we have subtraction. This does not represent another grouping symbol because it's just emphasizing the negative here. And then we have an exponent. So I have grouping, I have my brackets here, so I'm going to work out the grouping first. So I'm going to have 4 minus negative 3, which will give us 7. The exponent on the outside was not used yet, so that's going to be applied next. 7 squared will give us 49. In the next one, I'm going to first see if I have any grouping. I do. I have 3 minus 6. So I'm first going to do that. 3 minus 6, I get negative 3. I'm going to put that in parentheses just because it's being subtracted so I can emphasize that. And I'm going to bring down the parts that I haven't used yet. Okay, I don't have any other grouping, so now I'm going to look to see if I have exponents. I do. I have an exponent right there, so I can apply that next. So this would be 2 plus 64 minus negative 3. With addition and subtraction, the only thing I have left here is addition or subtraction. I'm not necessarily going to do the addition first. I'm going to work left to right. So I'm going to first do 2 plus 64. So I get 66, and it's minus negative 3. So the last thing I'm going to do is subtract negative 3, which just gives me 69. If I wanted to, I could also write this as 66 plus 3, because if we subtract a negative, it's the same as adding a positive. For number 6, I only have 2 operations here. I've got addition and I have an exponent. So I'm going to use my exponent first. So 5 squared just gives us 25. So it's 3 plus 25, which gives us 28. For number 7, this one has a lot more operations, so I'm going to look to see if I have grouping first. I do. So I'm going to use that first. So 2 minus 6 will give us negative 4. Since I still have an exponent on the outside, I'm not going to get rid of the parentheses yet. And then I'm just going to bring down the rest. Okay, I do not have any more grouping, but I have an exponent. So I'm going to apply that exponent next. So this will be 7 minus 3, and then in parentheses, I'm going to leave the parentheses because it's being multiplied with the 3, so they're there to show multiplication. And negative 4 squared will give us 16. Okay, the only things that I have left are subtraction and multiplication. Multiplication comes first. So I'm going to have 7 minus 48. And now there's only one operation left. 7 minus 48 gives us negative 41. For number 8, we have an exponent, we have a subtraction sign, and then we have this part that is a fraction. I'm going to worry about the fraction part first. And just like other times that I've dealt with fractions, I'm going to separate the fraction into the top and the bottom. So I'm just going to worry about the top here. I'm going to have the square root of 16 times 2 squared. I'm going to work out what's inside my grouping first. So I'm going to work out inside the grouping symbol or the square root. I have multiplication and an exponent, so I'm first going to apply the exponent. So I get 16 times 4. The other thing that I have inside my square root is multiplication, so I'm going to use that next. So that becomes the square root of 64. The last thing I'm going to do is to actually take the square root of it. So the square root of 64 is 8. So now I have 4 to the third minus 8 over 4. So now we can just simplify this part. 8 over 4 is just 2. So we have 4 to the third minus 2. I have an exponent, so I'm going to use that next. 4 to the third is 64. So 64 minus 2, I end up with 62. We will not deal with any that are like number 9. For these ones, you're just going to plug in values. So for example 2, it says evaluate the expression 2 minus 3x squared all over 2. And we're going to use, just so we don't get confused, we're going to use x equals -5. So you will replace the x with a -5 in your equation. So the only thing I'm going to do is when I get to the x, I'm going to replace it with a -5. So I just rewrote this and I'm putting a -5 in for where the x was. Okay, I'm going to worry about just the top right away. So if we look at the top, we have multiplication, subtraction, but we also have an exponent. So I will use that first. So we have 2 minus 3 times 25. It's still all over 2. If you wanted to separate this into two different parts until you were done with the top, you could do that as well. Looking at the top, the next thing I have that I'm going to worry about, I've got subtraction and I have multiplication, so the multiplication will come first. So that will be 75. So we have 2 minus 75 all over 2. I'm going to finish out the top. So that gives me -73, and it's over 2. We will look to see if it can simplify. If it can't, this will just be our answer. For number 10, in statistics, there is a formula for the lower fence in a box and whisker plot. For all sakes of this problem, you don't really need to know the context of it. You just need to look at the formula. So we want to solve for the lower fence, and we know IQR is equal to 33 and Q1 is equal to 60. So right where we have Q1, we'll put 60, and this will be minus 1.5, and because it's times IQR, I'm going to put the IQR in parentheses, which was 33. Okay, the only operations that we have here are subtraction and multiplication. So I'm going to use multiplication first. So we get 49.5. And bring down the 60 and the minus. So just subtract now, and we end up with 10.5. Another formula in statistics is for z-scores. Z is equal to x minus, this is the symbol for mu, over sigma. So we're going to find the z-score. So we have 3 things to plug in. So x is equal to 85. Mu is equal to 100. And sigma is 15. So we're going to work out just either the top or bottom first. So I'm going to work out just the top. So we get -15 over 15. And that would simplify if we just divide, we get -1. Okay, that sums up your section 2.5 notes. Please reach out with any questions you have.